Hope you're having a great day. All right, so we're still in the kibbutz, and we're after mail call. Remember mail call, Mom? Yeah, Rachel didn't get anything. David Myers delivering it. One by one by one, the names were recited, and the whoops of delight filled the room as first packages and then letters were handed out. Rachel swallowed hard as the last name was read, and hers had not been called. She sipped her cold coffee and listened to the snatches of conversation that floated around the room. "Looks like the motif's going to strangle the old city first," she heard David say to the leader of the kibbutz. "Then the Arab Legion will go for the city's jugular. I don't know how much longer we'll be able to get in and out freely." A wave of panic swept over Rachel. Not able to reach Jerusalem meant that she would have no reason left to live. There must be some oversight, she thought. Maybe the letter is still in the bottom of the mailbag. Perhaps it has been overlooked. She rose from the table and jammed her shaking hands down into her pockets. She hesitated a moment and then slowly walked to where David sat, talking and sipping coffee with several other men and two young Sabra women. She stood quietly at his right elbow until the conversation died and all the attention turned to her. Pardon me," she said haltingly. David turned to her brusquely, and then a smile danced across his lips as he drank in her beauty for the first time. He gave a low whistle and nudged the man beside him. "You guys have been holding out on me," he laughed. "Where have you been hiding all the gorgeous dames?" "What are you doing tonight, honey?" he joked. The two women at the table exchanged glances, and the men looked self-consciously at their hands. David noticed the change in the mood. "What's up?" he smiled. "Excuse me, please." Rachel turned to go. "I should not have interrupted." "Whoa, now, pretty lady." David jumped to his feet and grabbed her arm. Rachel continued to look down at the crack in the concrete floor, aware now that nearly every eye in the mess hall had turned toward her and the pilot. "Please," she said quietly, pulling away from him. "I am sorry." He lowered his voice then, and he held on to her wrist. "No, I'm sorry. I mean, I was just kidding, you know." "It's all right," she answered. "Can I help you with something?" he asked kindly as he pulled her to a bench. "You want some coffee?" Still not looking at him directly, she searched for her words. "I am waiting, you see, for a letter from the Jewish agency in Jerusalem about my family." David nodded. "It didn't come today?" Rachel looked into his eyes. "I thought perhaps it might have been lodged inside the bottom of the mail pouch." "Sure," David said hopefully. He filled with pity at the anguished hopelessness of the girl. "We'll have another look. What's your name?" "Rachel Lubetkin. I don't know how to say that, Mom." She spelled the name slowly as he opened the bags and rummaged inside them. "Sorry," he said, holding them upside down. "That's it." She looked at her hands again and tried to smile. "Yes," she said stiffly, fighting back tears of disappointment. "Thank you very much." She started to rise, but David again touched her arm. "Maybe next time, huh?" he said, trying to cheer her up. "Maybe." "Well, is there anything else I can help you with?" Rachel clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "Could you," she began haltingly, "would you take a letter to the agency for me by your own hand? Perhaps if you brought it to someone's attention? I have family there in Jerusalem. You see, a grandfather in the old city," she rushed to explain. "Sure, you got it. You get the letter, and I'll take it. It's out in the barracks." Rachel stood and walked quickly to the door. She turned and gazed gratefully at David before she ran to the barracks and her bunk, pulling yet another sheet of paper from her notepad and stuffing it into an envelope, addressing it to the Jewish agency. "Another letter, Rachel?" said one of her barrack companions in mock sympathy. "Don't tell me there's still no word from Jerusalem?" Rachel licked the seal and glared back at the woman. Then she turned on her heel and dashed back to the mess hall. She opened the door and stood self-consciously for a moment, waiting as the two women at the table filled David in on her peculiar past as an SS prostitute. One of the two looked up and saw her at the door and then nudged her companion to silence. They both stared awkwardly, and David turned, his eyes full of pity as he gazed at the beautiful young woman. Rachel's heart went numb, and she simply stepped back and closed the door. She clutched the letter to her and walked bleakly across the square, feeling totally alone. But she had felt alone before, and she would survive. "Hey, Rachel!" came a cheery voice. She did not stop or turn until David caught her by the elbow and spun her around. "Hey," he smiled into her eyes. "Haven't you got a letter for me to deliver?" Moshe watched in amusement as Ehud finished his third helping of cheese blintzes and wiped his mouth on his red flannel shirt sleeve and belched loudly. "It warms my heart," Ehud cooed Fanny Goldblatt lovingly, "to feed a man who likes to eat." She poured another round of coffee for Ehud, Moshe, and Yori, chief of Haganah intelligence, who had gathered in her Tel Aviv apartment. "Someday I'm going to marry you, Fanny," Ehud belched out again and pushed his plate away from him. "Only you would eat yourself to death in a week," Moshe laughed. "She feeds you free now, Ehud. Mary, and you pay for the grocery bill," Dove quipped, ducking as Fanny reached out to whack him on the top of his shiny bald head. Fanny plopped down at the large oak table and folded her hands in front of her. "And what makes you think I would have such a gorilla as this?" She stuck out her lower lip to mock a pout. "You know, Mom. King Kong would eat my cooking and not smell so bad himself." "That is why he went to sea," Moshe added with a grin. "The sardines don't notice." "But the refugees do," Dove howled. "At least I see them get safely to shore," Ehud mumbled. "Which reminds me, Moshe darling," Fanny broke in, "have you heard from Rachel? Such a beauty." She raised her eyebrows. Moshe looked at her with surprise and then shrugged and changed the subject. He had not allowed himself to think of the beautiful woman since he had last seen her. Now, at the mention of her name, he felt suddenly embarrassed, as though someone might sense the thoughts he had about her. "So," he said, "are we going to discuss the delivery or not?" All right. Dove pushed his chair back from the table. "Let's get to it. This might be my last ride for a while. I will be in Jerusalem." Moshe sipped his coffee, then added a little sugar, wondering how difficult it would be within weeks for the Jews of Jerusalem to find either sugar or coffee. "Then tonight we shall make a good trip, my little darling and I," he had promised. Dove cleared his throat and pushed the edge of the table, balancing on his chair on its last legs, as Fanny glared in silent disapproval. "We are bringing in a large group of young males this trip," explained Dove. "Military age. As soon as they're off the boat, we begin training." Moshe nodded in approval. "How many?" "As many as you can squeeze on board, Dove said. "There is one problem we have encountered. Some of our passengers might be plants." "Spies, Mom." "British?" growled Ehud, and Moshe imagined his hackles standing up like the ruff of a fierce dog. "Some," Dove said, a frown creasing the deep lines of his plump face. "Army American intelligence has been able to help us with that a bit. Don't ask me how or why, but there is one man in particular we need to watch. They themselves have been searching for him for 18 months. Dove reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. He stared at it hard and then tossed it across the table to Moshe. "He is an SS commando, an explosive expert until he murdered another officer over a girl in a brothel. His mother was Muslim Arab and his father German. This fellow grew up hating the Jews. No wonder with a combination like that." Moshe studied the craggy face and the jutting jaw, the ice-blue eyes that seemed cruel even in the picture. The only evidence of the SS officer's Arab heritage was the large, hawkish nose. Moshe had the vague, unsettling feeling that he'd seen the man somewhere before. So why should we be looking for him? "He is a terrorist," trained and bred for it. The Americans think he's responsible for a number of atrocities. They would have liked to have had him as a defendant in the Nuremberg trials. Unfortunately, after he sliced up his fellow officer, the Nazis threw him into Ravensbrück. Ravensbrück, gasped Ehud, with Jewish prisoners? Dove nodded. Poetic justice, eh? There he rotted until the end of the war, 5 months among his avowed enemies. And now? Moshe asked, feeling the uneven easiness growing. He was traced heading south through Yugoslavia. The Americans believe he may have tried to pass off for a Jew to get onto one of their ships and smuggled himself into Palestine. Not that it matters, because he is sure to take an alias, but his name is Frederick Ishmael Gerhardt. Tattoo number 346686. If you see anyone resembling him, check the tattoo. Moshe passed the photograph to Ehud, who studied it closely, then grunted and passed it back to Moshe. How do you know he's not already in the camp? We don't, but we are assuming he will make for the heart of Jerusalem and the Mutif's good graces. He had a friend, an Arab, that he attended commando school with, and I am certain you must remember him from the 36th uprising, Moshe. Moshe leaned forward and rested his arms on the table. Who is it? Ibrahim El Hassan. He's the one, I think, that's chasing Ellie, Mom. I think. Okay, now the next chapter is chapter 17, and it's called Ellie's Decision. I feel so bad for Rachel. Anyway, we'll see what happens, okay? I love you, Mom. Have a blessed day, and I'll talk to you soon.